Hey, good evening. Welcome. Nice to see some folks here. This is another segment of our Naturally Speaking series. And sorry, I'm a little nervous because I'm super excited. Big fan of our speaker tonight, who is Dan Cristol. He is an unconventional ecotoxicologist trained in both behavioral ecology and avian biology. Sorry, it's a mouthful, right? In 2005, he documented that mercury pollution from the Shenandoah River watershed was crossing ecosystem boundaries, entering the terrestrial food web and biomagnifying eventually into songbirds, which was, quite frankly, a monumental discovery. If you know birds, you know that birds are insectivores. And so this was really a huge finding. Cristol and his students have continued to document the health and conservation consequences of food web mercury, publishing approximately 50 papers on the effects of mercury on avian reproductive output, endocrinology, singing behavior, immune responsiveness, survivorship, and other aspects of evolution and ecology. Recently, he's branched out to other rivers and other contaminants to apply what was learned in the Shenandoah Valley to the rest of the country. Cristol teaches ornithology each spring and also prepares students for careers in medicine, environmental consulting, and elsewhere with his courses and research mentorship. So he is a professor at William & Mary. Tonight, he's going to speak about the threats to native bird populations and conservation action. We are so lucky to have him in our backyard and here in our VLM yard to talk about the threats that birds face in Virginia, from window collisions to cats, deer, habitat loss, and invasive species. And he's going to talk about what you can do to mitigate some of these impacts in your own yard. I'm super excited because I'm a bird nerd, and I've got some fellow bird nerds in the audience. So for the bird nerds here and those of you at home, we will be taking questions at the end, and we will let you know when that happens. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Jessica. That was very nice. We'll see if you're lucky to have me or not. Tonight I'm gonna talk about my path to becoming a scientist and lover of birds. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about threats to birds. And I hope to just turn that into a conversation where you guys, everyone's yard is different. Everyone's concerns are different. So I'll talk about some sort of broad threats to birds and what you can do about them, but it doesn't apply to every person. And maybe we can just turn it into a conversation at the end, I'm hoping. So, interest in birds, people's interaction with birds generally falls into three types of interactions, three categories that you may have one or more of these. So there's recreation. There's people who love to photograph birds, count as many birds as they can see, chase them around the country, checking them off on their list, or just sitting out in the woods, listening to them sing, watching them at their feeders. There's 45 million people in the US who do that. So that's recreational interest in birds. Then there's the scientific interest in birds. So there's people who either do citizen science or they are professional scientists like myself and study birds and try to learn what we can about nature and the way life works through studying birds, for example, what part of their brain helps them to remember the places that they have migrated to and how to get back there, or something, questions like that are of general interest to humanity, maybe not that much interest to the birds. And then the third category of interest in birds is conservation. So some people are interested in protecting birds along with other wildlife. Many people are. And that may be a different interest. That may not be a scientific interest. And they also may not really be recreating with birds. They may just be interested in policy and raising money for birds and that sort of thing. So if you think of those three circles in a Venn diagram where you have one circle being recreation, one circle being science, and one circle being conservation, I'm right in the middle of all that because I've spent my life involved in all three of those things. And so I'll talk a little bit about each of those, starting with my scientific career. And there's many people who study birds. This is always surprising to some. There's lots of people who study birds and are ornithologists, but they're not interested in birding or bird watching. They don't feed birds, and they don't know how to identify any of the birds other than the one species that maybe they study in the laboratory. And so there's many different ways to be interested in birds. And my interest started when I was very young. So I'm very lucky. I never had to decide what to do with my life. It just happened. At age 4, my father was a bird watcher. This is a picture of me, maybe age 6 or something. But my father was a bird watcher. He forced my sister and I to go out bird watching with him, which we didn't really like. We used to share a pair of binoculars that he would hold up and kind of shove our head into, and the bird wouldn't really be there. But it kind of stuck with me. And I know the moment I started bird watching was when I was 4 years old, and I saw this bird, an American woodcock, which you could call my spark bird because it's the farthest back bird that I can remember really being interested in. It was on the bricks in my backyard. This is not it. This is a more recent picture of one on the bricks. And I felt like I'd had some incredibly special visit. It was in October and they were migrating. And I lived in a tiny little row house in Philadelphia downtown. And there was just bricks and the bird was sitting there all day. And I called my father on the phone and described him a bird that looked like a football with a long beak. He told me what it was. In retrospect, it wasn't that lucky for the bird because the bird probably was attracted into the lights at night while it was migrating, was probably should have trapped in our yard till the next night when it could when it took off. But that's when I started bird watching because I got a lot of attention from my dad for spotting that bird and being able to describe it. And one thing led to another. I've spent 25 years or 26 years at William & Mary as a scientist, studying birds, but studying basic biology questions having to do with birds, not necessarily about birds. And since 2005, I've been working almost exclusively, after doing all sorts of different research, almost exclusively on the question of what pollution does to birds and how it gets into them from rivers, which is where much of our pollution is dumped into rivers. This is the South River, which is the main tributary of the South Fork of the Shenandoah River. And behind it are the smokestacks of a plant formerly owned by DuPont that made textile fabric, and it dumped a lot of mercury into the river in 1929 through 1949. And that mercury's still there. And so that's what we were studying. So I'm also a fanatical bird watcher. I go around the world looking for birds. When I'm in other countries, I just enjoy how cool they are. I just got back from Australia. This is a trip to Australia that I took a little while ago, but I just love seeing birds around the world. The birds I teach about, getting to see, there's nothing like just running across an emu in the woods. But I also bird locally. This is, we're always looking for something rare. This is a limpkin that showed up in my neighborhood a few years ago. So a bird from Florida that just got lost. And, if you got your eye out, you'll see all kinds of cool things. But I also chase birds around. This picture is intentionally hard to see because this is a flamingo that's been in Florida for the last 4 years. It got blown there by a hurricane and deposited and lives all by himself. And I drove all the way there and I stood around in the fog for hours until I could just barely make out that little pink flamingo. And then I jumped back in my car and drove home. And that's what, a fanatic bird watcher sometimes does. But it's not always that fuzzy. That was the Stellar sea eagle. So I have a good friend and we met and drove up to Maine and saw that thing. And so I love recreational bird watching. There's no science involved in this, and there's really no conservation involved in this. This is just how I have fun. And it's very different than the other ways that I interact with birds. And sometimes it all kind of blurs together. So there's my bird watching. And some of my science, I've been studying birds really as long as I can remember. Even in high school, I was doing projects, with attempting to study birds. The questions that scientists ask generally are just based on something strange that you observe and you wonder what's going on. So you've probably all seen gulls, herring gulls, dropping clams on the beach or on roads, docks, things like that. And so I studied that for years because I wanted to know how can they do such a complicated behavior, and does it really pay? Because they have to drop these clams over and over again, and they have to fly pretty high up in the sky to do it. It uses a lot of energy. And I asked questions like, do the young ones already know how to do it, or do they have to watch the adults? When do they start doing it? Is it something that they practice and get better at? If you calculate mathematically how many calories they're using to do it, does it actually pay to eat any size of clam or only certain choice sizes of clams? Questions like that. So as a basic scientist, just studying nature and trying to answer questions about how nature works, you can do things like that. They don't have it. There's really no practical implications to this. I'm not solving any major problem by, well, sometimes those clamshells pop the bike tires at Jamestown. But other than that, there's really no problem with this behavior. It's just something that is fascinating to try to understand, in some sense, how birds think and how they solve problems and how different or similar they are to humans. So there's an example of one of the many different things I've studied. And we got to kind of a good place of understanding that. So I started studying other things. Some of the things I do are more practical. For example, people kept asking me, are golf courses good places for birds? Or are they just look like good places and the birds come there and die because there's so many chemicals being used on the golf course? I don't know the answer to that question. So I spent quite a few years looking at how birds do on golf courses. Do they have more babies than birds that are living in similar looking habitats that aren't golf courses, that don't use all the chemicals, such as a college campus or a county park? So we put these bluebird boxes up and we would just study and the bluebirds and the chickadees that nested in them and how much food they were bringing into their babies, how many babies they had, what happened to the babies. This is a student, Allison Jackson. She is following with a radio transmitter babies that are wearing little radio transmitters. She's got an antenna there. And so it's very hard to find out what happens to baby birds once they leave the nest and are being taken care of by the male parent and then are just off on their own. But we could follow them and get their survival rates. And so this is practical because we can write scientific papers, but we can also write sort of management articles about that golf course architects could use to design better courses, or the golf course managers can use. And we can find out, is there a problem? Are they using too many pesticides? So this is more applied research, a lot different than the questions about how efficient gulls are when they're eating clams. And I've done lots of other research, so I'm just going to quickly run through it on this slide, some of the major topics, and maybe someone can ask me about them if they want. I've spent many years looking at one little part of the brain. This is what scientists do. They just get narrower and narrower. One little part of the brain called the hippocampus in birds. And that's where they remember spatial information. And so looking at whether birds that migrate, whether they have a larger or denser with cells hippocampus, and also after they migrate versus before they migrate, does it actually get bigger? Because birds' brains, unlike human brains, and particularly the hippocampus, they get bigger when they need that part of the brain and get smaller when they don't need it. For example, in the spring, when the males sing, the parts of the brain involved in producing song get bigger, and then they shrink down again in the winter when they don't need them. So I've studied the hippocampus of birds quite a bit and how it affects their spatial movement. Very different. You know, when a shopping mall comes in and wipes out part of a wetland with their parking lot, that's legal, even though we have a no net loss laws about wetlands, because they can build a new wetland somewhere else. And so we studied for a long time a series of wetlands that had been built by developments, a lot of them by VDOT actually, because VDOT, when they widen roads, they take out wetlands and they very responsibly put in new ones somewhere else. But the question is, can you really build a wetland that birds can use? It definitely works for flood control, like a man-made wetland slows down flooding just like a natural wetland. But do birds move in? So we did a series of studies on these aging created wetlands and whether they were getting more and more birds, because they really don't have very many when they start. They look terrible. And then they turn more into something that looks like a wetland, but they never develop the full grouping of birds, the full community of birds, because because humans just can't do it the way nature can. We just don't produce wetlands that are for reasons that we understand. So that's an interesting series of studies that was done around here. I also did some studies with a microbiologist on this strange fact that birds have, their feathers are full of fungus and bacteria, yeasts, little one-cell fungus and bacteria. And if you put their feathers in a culture, in a tube, in an incubator with some of these bacteria, the feathers disappear in a week or two. These bacteria can digest feathers, but they don't. So the question is, why are they there? And why do the birds still have feathers? And are they constantly munching away at the feathers or not? And industry was really excited about this because they have a lot of chicken feathers they have to get rid of. Feathers don't degrade very easily at all. And so if you are raising millions of chickens on the Eastern Shore, you end up with a lot of feathers. What do you do with them? If you could digest them with some kind of bacteria, that would be quite handy. So there are bacteria that'll do that under the right conditions, but they don't do it on the birds. So we did a series of experiments of looking at why. And the answer is that they need very special conditions, and ultraviolet light slows them down. And the yeast in the bird's feathers also kill the bacteria. So on an actual bird, it's okay to have all this bacteria, but in a test tube where you just put one kind of bacteria, warm it up and give it a little salt, shake it around a little bit. So there's very interesting things happening on the plumage of a bird at the microscopic level that you would never know about. Also, the birds have uropygial oil, which is an oil that they get out of their one gland, which is at the base of their tail. That oil is full of antibiotics that they spread around them and selectively kill certain kinds of bacteria. But there's also lots of other things in that oil that they're just trying to get rid of. Differential bird migration was what I started studying at the very beginning of graduate school. And that is the fact that a lot of birds, although the male and the female breed together and they have babies at the same place, obviously, when they migrate, they go different distances and they end up in completely different wintering ranges. So they don't winter together. Other birds go the same distance. Every member of the family goes the same distance. So I was studying differential migration. Why do birds like these dark-eyed juncos end up segregated across the country with the adult males in the north and then the young males, adult females, young females, not 100%, but they really segregate out. What are the factors that cause that? And why do other birds not do it? And some birds have the reverse, where the males go further than the females. So those are really interesting questions. A lot of people have looked at that same thing, and it's interesting for bird watchers, but it's also just interesting to, if we really understand the ecology of these birds, we would be able to explain that. But then recently I felt I was too scattered. It's not that recent, more than 10 years now. I really have focused on just pollution, starting with the Shenandoah River. And so that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my little research talk here. So I've been looking, I'm a specialist on mercury, and most people study mercury in bald eagles and herons and birds that eat fish, because that's where we think of mercury being. But we found that the birds that eat insects, like all the warblers and sparrows and finches, they also are exposed to mercury, and they're getting it through their food. I'll tell you more about that in a second. I just want to plug for William & Mary. William & Mary it's a great university, but what we're really good at is giving undergraduate researchers experience in the field or in the lab, where they're working at the level of a graduate student, doing real research that really matters. Why? Because we don't really have many graduate students. Like in biology, we don't have any PhD students. So we were able to rely on these wonderful students to come out in the field and work with us. And so all the research that I've talked about and that I will be talking about is done with large numbers of students who then mostly go on to careers where they're using this training. Okay, so mercury. Why are we even studying mercury? When you think of mercury, you may think of if your fillings are silver, That's 50% mercury and 50% other stuff. If your fillings are white, there's no mercury in them. So many of us have a lot of mercury in our mouths, right near our brains. But that's not really where we get our mercury exposure. You get your mercury exposure from tuna fish almost exclusively. It's just, I can simplify the whole world for you. Don't eat tuna, don't eat swordfish. You won't get very much mercury. You can eat whatever other fish you want, except for some very exotic kinds. Because really big fish with really big mouths eat other big fish, and they eat medium-sized fish, and they eat small fish, and the mercury biomagnifies up into these big fish, and then you eat the big fish. So you're the biggest fish of all, and you get a lot of mercury. So I would recommend just simplify your life, stop eating tuna, stop eating swordfish, eat whatever else you want, and your mercury levels will go way down. Mercury's really bad if you're planning to have a baby, to have that in your body because it affects the baby's brain, but it's also bad for cardiovascular health. And it's also bad if you have enough of it for your neurological health. Like you get stupid basically. So people are concerned about mercury, but actually the mercury that wildlife gets mostly comes from industry, such as coal-fired power plants. They release small amounts of mercury with every piece of coal they burn, and that mercury then spreads out throughout the entire planet in the atmosphere and deposits on the ground. So animals, even in the extreme Arctic and Antarctic, are exposed to mercury. And if they're eating large animals themselves, then they're getting higher levels of mercury that's biomagnified up the food web. It's not thought to be a problem for little birds, and I'll just point out what else is on this slide. Most of the mercury in the world comes from these historic mining sites, and you'll see one in San Francisco there. The gold rush was facilitated by the fact that there's mercury and gold in that area. You need mercury to mine gold because gold and mercury stick together. And so huge amounts of mercury have contaminated all of these areas, but now we spread it all over the whole globe with industry coming out of smokestacks. And every time you turn your car on, a little teeny bit of mercury gets released because it's in all fossil fuels. But what did we do? Well, we tested the mercury in the blood of birds. We would just sample blood from the same vein that you sample blood when you go to the doctor. And we discovered how much mercury is in all the different songbirds up and down the Shenandoah River. And then we said, well, it's probably coming in their food. So we did a little trick where you're not going to like this, but no birds were harmed. Maybe trauma, but no actual mental trauma from this. But you put a zip tie around their neck, okay, in a baby bird for 1 hour, and you put it back in the nest. The zip tie allows them to breathe, but not to swallow. So the parents shove food down their throat, and then you just come back after 1 hour and you take the food out and you take the zip tie off and you go on to the next nest. And this way you get a sample of what the actual birds are eating, and you can test how much mercury is in that and what it is. And what we discovered was that most of the mercury in birds in the Shenandoah Valley was coming from spiders. Like this house wren here is eating a spider. Why would that be? Well, spiders aren't in the water. They don't live in the water, but they are high on the food web. So they are like little tuna fish. You know, they eat smaller insects that eat smaller insects. In fact, a lot of spiders eat other spiders, and they eat smaller insects. These aren't web weaving spiders either, because birds don't go into spider webs. Spider webs are sticky, and they have those zigzag things on them to scare the birds away. These are those wolf spiders that run around and attack and eat anything. So the spiders in the Shenandoah Valley in the floodplain away from the river have as much mercury as the fish in the river. So if you're an osprey eating fish, we know exactly how you're going to get your mercury. But if you're a little songbird, now we know how you're going to get your mercury. 75% of it comes from spiders, even though they only make up about 35% of the diet. So they just have a lot of mercury in them. But everything there has a little bit of mercury in it because it comes out of the flood. It comes out of the river during the floods, gets into the soil, gets into the plants, gets into the caterpillars. Whoever eats a caterpillar gets a little more mercury, and it just moves up the food web. So this was kind of a novel discovery, and it made people worry about songbirds and whether mercury was maybe contributing to their problems all over the world, not just in the Shenandoah Valley. However, showing that the birds there have mercury in them and how they're getting it doesn't tell you whether it's harming the birds or not. So we did all kinds of studies on their reproductive success, how their songs sounded, how they behaved, how well they took care of their young, what their hormones looked like, what their immune system looked like in the field. And we always found that the ones in the mercury contaminated sites were worse off than the ones above the factory, which is in Waynesboro. That's great, but it's still just a correlation, right? There could be something else coming out of that factory that's not the mercury that is causing that problem. You don't know. So we had to go to the laboratory, and I didn't want to work with wild birds in the laboratory. So we used a domestic species called the zebra finch, which has been, these zebra finches haven't seen the wild in over 150 years. They were exported out of Australia to Britain, turned into domesticated birds, and then they've just been bred ever since. So we have a colony of zebra finches, and we fed them low levels of mercury as if they're just eating tuna fish all the time or spiders. And this isn't enough to make them look sick or anything. They look absolutely fine. They breed, they sing, but we look for this. Can we find the same problems in these birds that we find in the Shenandoah Valley? Because now we know we gave them the mercury and we didn't give them anything else. So if they have the same problems, it's caused by the mercury. So here's one of the many things we found. I have two graphs only, but I am a scientist. I got to show you at least two graphs. So this is a graph of on the up and down axis, you have the number of offspring produced. That's how many babies they had in 1 year, okay, that lived. And you can see, and then on the bottom, you have the different doses of mercury, 0, 0.3 parts per million, 0.6 parts per million, 1.2 parts per million, and 1.2 parts per million is what's in the spider, and 2.4 parts per million. That would be like eating swordfish all the time. So you can see that the number of babies that survive goes down exactly like it did in the wild. And it's dose dependent. And the more mercury you give them, the fewer babies that live. And so this is the kind of evidence that is much stronger than just field studies when you have both. Even more, I have thousands of graphs like this I could show you, but I'm only going to show you one more because this one I think is kind of amazing. So we took those birds, those same zebra finches, never exposed to mercury before. We exposed them to mercury for a couple of months, had them nest, had them raise their babies. So they're feeding their babies mercury food, and they put a little mercury in the egg because they deposit it in the egg. And then we took those babies and we never gave them mercury again for their whole lives. They grew up and they had babies themselves. So now there's no mercury in their body, just no detectable mercury in their body. It's been a year since they've been anywhere near mercury. And you can see here, we have control. That means never exposed to mercury, and exposed, which means when they were little, they were exposed to mercury through their parents. And even they have fewer babies, the next generation. And it's not the mercury that's in their bodies that's doing it. It's that little bit of exposure when they were little that changed their brain or their hormones. We don't exactly know all of the things that it's doing. So this means that it's very potent, and it's not just you can't recover from it that easily, even if it's not in your body anymore, if you've been exposed to it when you're little. Again, I want to stress, these birds look absolutely fine. Their parents look fine. We know exactly how much mercury to give them to cause some effects, but not to cause any sort of discomfort or anything that we can detect. So what do you do with information like that? Well, we were lucky that the US government was working with DuPont to try to solve this problem of DuPont's pollution of the Shenandoah Valley. And DuPont, of course, their lawyers said, prove it. And we did. So they settled for $50 million to improve habitat for birds, not right on the river because they can't really clean that up, but near the river or above stream. And so they're adding acreage to parks that already exist and creating new preserves and creating bird habitat by planting trees in barren farmland and buying up land that would be turned into housing developments. And so they're creating not just for birds, but also for everything else that lives there. So the toads and the turtles and everything that was affected by the mercury. They're also trying to improve the fishery. So there's more human fishing recreation there. So this was really exciting to me. And I had that picture of me in that parking lot. That's the DuPont factory parking lot. And some of this money, I think over $1 million, is going to be used to rip out that parking lot and plant trees right there at the plant to create bird habitat. And it's not actually contaminated because it's up a little bit from the river. There hasn't been flooding there. So that's just really exciting. And so this kind of seeing my research, my basic research, pure science, just for the sake of knowledge, turned into $50 million settlement, like within a few years. It's incredibly exciting for the students and for me and for everyone who worked on it. And a lot of the students got so excited that they do this for a career now. They work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Some of them work on this exact case even, because these cases go on forever. So I kind of shifted my emphasis to this looking at these big rivers around the country, not just for mercury, but other, using the same techniques we used to look at the damage that was done by other chemicals on other rivers. And so I'm working on 5 or 6 of them right now. One of them recently settled. I don't know if you can see that, but this company Mallinckrodt that put mercury in the Penobscot River, they settled for up to $267 million for, again, creating more bird habitat. So I'm really proud to have helped with that case. And I'm working on the Hudson River case. The $20.5 million, that's not the settlement. That's the money that they're giving for research. So you can imagine the settlement, might have a B in it. It's going to be probably big because they put PCB into many miles of that river, hundreds of miles of that river, and the upper stretches are still pretty contaminated. And we were able to work with showing how many birds were there, and then over the years, how many birds wouldn't have lived. Why is the government going after these companies? It's because the law called Superfund states that they have to, because you own all the birds in this country. The people of this country own the birds. And if a company takes them from you, it's the government's responsibility to make them give it back. And the way they give it back is to create habitat for new birds to replace the ones that they took by preventing from surviving. So there's laws in place that make this possible. And my research just happened to sort of fit into this nicely. Also, we find all kinds of cool things. I know I'm almost out of time. I'm just going to end it quickly here and open it up to your questions. But this is an interesting side study. We studied all these waterfowl in the Shenandoah River. And of course, we put a band on their leg to make sure we don't sample this blood from the same one twice. We let them go. And then unlike other birds, when waterfowl gets shot by somebody, they usually report it to the government because it's legal. And so they send the band number in. And what we found was that these highly contaminated waterfowl from the Shenandoah River, which no one hunts on the Shenandoah River because there's signs all over the place saying, don't eat anything from this river. But look where they go. So some guy in Florida shot a wood duck, presumably ate it, didn't know that it had recently been filling up with mercury all summer on the Shenandoah River. This poor guy in Indiana ate a mallard. Canada geese go up to Pennsylvania to molt, I guess, and they're carrying a lot of mercury with them. So we make all kinds of, once you get out there and just start studying something, you make all kinds of really interesting discoveries. And those tend to be more interesting than the things that you started to look at. This is just a real quick picture of me at one of the undisclosed sites that I'm working at now. And you can see there's just this industrial hellscape in the background where dioxin has been released into this river. In the foreground, on the other side of the river, there's tons of good bird habitat. And the birds don't know that this river is full of dioxin, really high levels of dioxin. On the right is just an interesting thing that we found at this site. Those are gray catbirds in the nest. The nest is entirely made out of plastic. And so every nest there is made out of plastic. Catbirds absolutely love making the nest out of plastic. And I don't know if it's good or bad for the birds. The birds seem to, it seems to work. The nest lasts forever, of course. But so that's another discovery that I'm sort of interested in, the adoption. I've seen lots of birds using plastic now, and I don't know how widespread a problem it is. There's the kind of thing you find when you work at these sites and you turn a corner. And so threats to North American birds. I've just been talking about one threat. There are lots and lots of threats to North American birds, and I only have the ones that start with C here, okay? Just to give you an idea of how many there are. So climate change is the biggest threat to birds and most of nature. And that's because the sea level is rising. So anything that lives on an island is in big trouble. Anything that lives in wetlands is in big trouble if they're tidal, because the habitat that they need is underwater now, much of it. Timing of nesting is off. If you arrive back early, but not early enough, and the insects have already bred, then you're going to not have anything to feed your babies. So messing around with the timing of spring is tricky for birds that migrate from South America, because they're not as attuned to how warm it is right here. And it's hard for them to evolve fast enough to keep up with that. And habitats are moving. So birds that like a certain set of plants that live together, as the temperature changes, those plants can't necessarily survive in that area. It may become too salty from saltwater incursion, or it may just be too hot for them. So in the past, when climates have changed over glacial receding and advancing, it happened very gradually. The plants move in front of the glacier or fill in behind the glacier, and the birds can move with them. Now, we've surrounded these habitats with city, and the plants can't really do that. And so it's not clear how habitat's going to keep up with climate change. Cats are a huge problem. I don't need to tell anyone. They kill a lot of birds. It's estimated 1 billion a year in North America. And that's just cats that are have an owner, that are outdoor cats. They don't know how many the really feral cats are killing. Collisions are a new problem, relatively new problem. Birds hit skyscrapers, and they've done that for a long time. They tend to do it at night when they're lit up, but they also hit windows on regular houses. And because there's so many regular houses, even though each one only kills maybe a couple of birds a year, that's actually the biggest source of mortality for birds, which might be 500 million to 1 billion a year. We don't really know from all the collisions. So every house just killing 1 or 2 white-throated sparrows and 1 robin, it starts to add up. But we also have wind turbines going up, and they are often put in places that are migratory corridors. So that's an issue, although we definitely need wind energy. You have to be very careful about where you put them, and you have to allow for migration. And birds hit cars, and they always have, but I think there's always more cars. So this adds up to a lot of collisions. Contaminants. I've just been talking about mercury, but PCBs, oil spills. We don't talk about oil spills as much because the ships are safer, but when they do spill, it's still really bad. And pesticides. We use enormous amounts of pesticides in agriculture, and we use them even at a higher rate in our yards. So the highest rate per acre of pesticide use is in homes, is in front of homes for lawns. And so that's something. And then cervids, I wanted to be a C, but that's deer. Deer are in the group Cervidae. So the moose, the deer, the elk, reindeer, they're all cervid mammals. They have quietly destroyed millions of acres of bird habitat. Places like the Shenandoah National Forest, which is full of deer, which doesn't allow hunting. It seems like it should be just this pristine place full of birds, but the deer have eaten everything under 6 feet, basically in the whole national park. So any bird that feeds or nests anywhere near the ground really is rare in the Shenandoah National Forest now. Birds in the canopy, like summer tanagers and red-eyed vireos, they're not affected by deer. A few birds benefit, like chipping sparrows and ovenbirds actually like a big open forest. But deer are a problem that hasn't been recognized. When you look at lists of threats to birds, deer are never on that list. They're on my list, and I'm publishing a big paper soon, I hope, about what a serious threat this is. But it's kind of a controversial topic because people do like their deer. So these are some of the threats, and I'm just hoping after the next slide to turn this into a conversation where you ask me about the things you're concerned about. Here's what you can do for birds about these threats. Climate change. I mean, this is a complex issue. Why society hasn't done anything about climate change, really. But the thing you can do is to make it a priority and vote for the candidate that wants to do something about the climate. You can also reduce your energy use, because climate, all that carbon, every time you switch a light on or turn on your car, you are contributing to climate change. And you can do less of that. That's what you can do today, immediately. it's still worth turning your lights off, even if you have super efficient LEDs. What about cats? Well, the simple answer is, I love cats. You should love cats too. Just keep them inside. Never let them go outside ever once in their life, and they'll be fine. They don't know about the outside. Let them look out the window. Put a bird feeder on your windowsill and let them attack, let them go crazy, but you don't need to let them outside. What other people do with their cats is a different issue, and we can talk about that. Collisions, you can't do anything really about the policies in cities about tall buildings. That has to be dealt with at a political level, but you can safeguard the windows at your home. So instead of killing 5 birds every year, you don't kill any. And there's new product, which are films that those stickers, there's a few around here even, the stickers of the shape of a hawk, they don't work at all. They do absolutely nothing unless you completely cover your entire window with them. But there are stickers you can put on the outside of your window that reflect in the ultraviolet, so they look really bright to birds. Unfortunately, it's not just a sticker. You have to do your entire window with stripes or dots, but you can get used to it. And from the inside, you don't see it that well. And we don't see in the ultraviolet, so we don't see the bright glare. But that will 100% stop birds from hitting your window. And these products are available. You can just go online and go to Kaleidoscape or any of 10 other companies that are selling this stuff and find the product that's right for you. It costs a few $100s for, a couple of huge windows, but do the windows that are killing birds and you will stop that problem. You no longer have to just think, what can I do? It's only a few a year. And finally, contaminants. You can't change agricultural policy, and the pesticides you're using now are a lot less bad than the ones that we used 20 or 30 years ago. But you can stop having a lawn. Your neighbors might look askance at you. You may feel weird about it, but there's nobody said you have to have a lawn. And your lawn requires chemicals. If it's really still a lawn, you're using chemicals on it. Mine isn't a lawn anymore because I don't use chemicals on it. But if you get rid of your lawn and put other things in that don't require chemicals or much maintenance from you, you'll have more birds on your property, and you won't be contributing to adding all these pesticides to the Chesapeake Bay, which is everything you put on your lawn ends up in the Chesapeake Bay eventually. Finally, deer, cervids. This is a complex issue, which is why I'm writing a very long paper on it that I'm falling asleep almost just thinking about that paper, but it's going to be so boring. But we actually caused the deer problem. There were no deer left. In the 1930s, deer had been hunted almost to extinction. And so we saved the deer, and then people started hunting them and enjoying that. And so we managed so that there's lots and lots of deer. We manage much of our forests for deer so that hunters can find deer pretty easily. Hunters they buy more licenses if they're more likely to keep hunting if they get a deer when they go out. So we have a weird system where the state wildlife agencies in every state are funded entirely by licenses, fishing and hunting licenses, not by tax dollars. And so their incentive is to sell as many licenses as possible, which means they manage for the things that get hunted and not for hooded warblers. And the birds they're going to love are turkeys and bobwhite. And so we have managed for deer to create this huge super overabundance of deer, where deer are 10 to 100 times more abundant than they should be, and they're destroying the forest. We've also gotten rid of their predators long ago, and so there's an incredible number of deer. Even without that problem, deer love the suburbs because we put out plants they like, and we don't have predators there either, except for cars. And we love our deer. I mean, I love to see the deer in my yard. But we have to make a choice. The deer have absolutely destroyed the birds in Eastern North America, just many of the species, just silently. No one knew it was happening. The forest looks great. All the trees are still there, but the birds are diminished terribly because the deer have cleared out the place that most of the birds feed. So only those that spend their entire life and nest up in the canopy can be unaffected by deer. So we can have some deer. We just can't have anywhere near as many as we do now. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions, including from the people who are on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining me here in the room and on Zoom. And if you're on Zoom, you can type in your questions. And if you're here in the room, you can ask me and I'll repeat your questions so that everyone can hear it. Yeah. Have I ever measured the mercury content in rainwater? That's a great question. So it's pretty low in rainwater, but rain just keeps coming and the mercury stays where it lands. So we are concerned about that because we were interested in how much mercury is coming out of this river. And we want to know if we're also getting mercury from other places that wouldn't be from the DuPont factory, say, or from this or that factory. So yes, the rainwater contains very, very small amounts of mercury, but it does contain mercury all over the world. And in places like the White Mountains, where clouds are in Vermont and New Hampshire, where clouds are continuously hitting the mountains, the trees actually scrub the rain, they scrub the moisture out of the forest, and the mercury adheres to the trees. So you get a lot of mercury up at high elevations if it's a continuously cloudy place. But most places, that's not a big contributor. Yes. I think you mean our golf course is good or bad for birds, right? Yeah. Canada geese are terrible for golf courses. That's the answer to your question. Golf courses, surprisingly, are pretty good for birds. Pesticides are extremely expensive, and golf courses tend to, unlike farmers, they tend to just use them when they have an outbreak. So it's not that frequent. They're terrible for water quality because they use fertilizer constantly, but that's a problem downstream. For the birds on the golf course, all that fertilizer causes constant growth of grass, which is eaten by insects, and so there's a lot of food there. So birds on golf courses do pretty well, sometimes better than birds off of golf courses. However, the nature of the habitat on a golf course is only suitable for certain kinds of birds, and they tend to be the birds that are already very common in the suburbs. So they're not really the birds that need conservation help. Birds that need conservation help, that need a lot of trees, don't tend to do well on golf courses. They disappear from the golf courses. And so golf courses are fine for birds, but they're not good as a conservation solution for birds because they don't attract or support birds that need help, except there are a few unusual cases. The red cockaded woodpecker is one of them. They kind of like golf courses. Any other questions? What's my favorite bird? Well, I have an answer for that. My favorite bird is the Baltimore Oriole. It's a beautiful bird, bright orange. It arrives in the spring and lets you know that spring is here in a shocking kind of way early on a May morning. And I also like the Baltimore Orioles baseball team. And so it just all came together for the Baltimore Oriole. I had a really exquisite look at one when I was a young teenager, and it just made a big impression on me because I thought, how can nature produce something this orange? This is just incredible. Yeah, so a gentleman in the audience has Orioles that come in the fall, eat grape jelly on his window all winter, maybe 10 of them. And then they molt from their kind of dull winter plumage to this bright orange plumage. And they just left last week. That's exactly right. So our Orioles, most Orioles should be in Mexico in the winter, and they should come back and they should pass through here and then breed north of here. And with climate change, they're breeding farther and farther north and less here. Your Orioles just decided we can just eat grape jelly all winter, skip the trip to Mexico, and then we can take off early and get the best spot up in Massachusetts before anybody else gets back. So that's what they're doing. And I don't know, if I ate grape jelly all winter, I feel like I wouldn't be able to migrate, but they eat other stuff too besides your grape jelly. That's the calories though that they're getting. Yes. How do I feel about it? I feel really, the question is, yeah. Is it good or bad for birds? So the question is feeding birds good or bad for them? I feed birds. I do it for myself because I love to have them close to me, close to the house where I can see them and watch all their behaviors. And it's a great thing to do at breakfast. And studies have shown that the kinds of birds that are most abundant at bird feeders are also the ones that have stable or increasing populations in this country. So it's certainly not harming birds because the ones that come to the feeders are doing really well. I see no downside to feeding birds. They continue to know how to get food by themselves. If you go on vacation and you stop feeding, they do something and then they come back and they're still there. So I don't see any downside to it as long as you're responsible, you keep your feeders clean. And I tend to give mine a little break in the summer just to sort of kill off any molds and things that are there. I stop for a while and then I start up again. But see, what are the good seasons to feed birds? Well, if you want to, the minimum you should do is middle of October through April. And that's when you can get really cold weather. And while feeding birds is mainly for the person who's feeding them, it will save lives a couple of days a year. And those days tend to occur, when you have an ice storm. And so it's good to feed birds. You got to be consistent. But after April, it's really, they don't need it. But if you enjoy having them around, do it. Is suet better than birdseed in the winter? Yeah, suet in the summer is bad because it melts and gets moldy. But suet is fantastic. It's a rich source of calories and fats for birds that eat insects all year round, and they have trouble finding insects in the winter. So you get a much better variety of birds if you put up suet. So I really love my suet feeder. Also, there's birds that turn to suet in the coldest weather. They won't touch it any other time. So I recommend a suet feeder, but the mainstay of what you should put out should be seeds. And if you can do it, if you have a messy backyard like mine, I just throw most of my seeds on the ground because that's where most of the birds can get them and you can spread it out the most. And so I have an enormous flock of sparrows. I'm partial to juncos and white-throated sparrows. And so I've put most of my seed on the ground, and then I have a few hanging feeders, and then I have two suet feeders. And I tend to use pure suet rather than suet with the seeds in it, because then the squirrels and the starlings won't eat it all in 2 days. Yes. Yes. So human hair, dog hair, cat hair, birds are desperate for hair just at this time of year, because after they build the stick base of their nests and then they weave grass and then very fine grass, the final layer for most songbirds is hair. And if you put pet hair out, they'll love it. But if you don't, they have to actually go around and look for individual single hairs from deer and rabbits on the ground and pick them up one at a time until they have a whole mouthful. And that takes a couple of days. So you save them a lot of work by putting out hair. It's best if it's cut into relatively short pieces so that they can't handle big tangly stuff. And if there is a dead animal in your neighborhood, a roadkill animal, and you're studying the nests in that neighborhood, you will find that every single bird in the neighborhood has lined their nest with the same exact hair from that unfortunate raccoon or whatever it was, because they are desperate for hair to keep those eggs incubated, insulated keep the warmth from their bodies longer when they go off to get food. So that's a good observation. Yeah. That's a great question. What foods help birds with their colors? I personally haven't studied that, but I teach classes, so I had to learn about it from other people. So birds produce color in two different ways. One is they use pigments, and the other is they have structural color, which means they have tiny air holes in their feathers, microscopic. And when the light hits those feather air holes, it bends some of it's absorbed and some of it bounces back into your eye, and that's what you see. Any blue bird is using structural color, and there's no pigment in there other than just melanin. And so that's why bluebirds don't look very blue when they're in the shade. They just, because you're not getting much reflection. However, most birds use pigments for other colors like yellows, greens, reds. And there's two kinds of pigments. One is melanin. They can just produce that easily. It's cheap. The other is called carotenoids, carotene, like in carrots. You know, if you eat too many carrots, you turn orange. That's because you've got too much carotene pigment in your body. I don't know if that's really true that you turn orange, but maybe it is. But birds eat foods that have carotenoid pigments if they're yellow or red, and then they convert those, they take those pigments and they assimilate them into their feathers as the feathers are growing, and the feathers come out red or yellow. Now, if they don't get enough carotenoids, they come out kind of dull. So when you look at house finches, some of them are really bright red and some of them are just kind of dull orangey. That's because the bright red ones got more carotenoids when they were growing their feathers. They were able to find foods that have the carotenoids. You've all heard of perhaps flamingos at the zoo that turn white when they stop feeding them the shrimp, because the shrimp has the carotenoids. And if you just put them on chicken feed, the flamingos are fine, but they don't have any pigment for their feathers. So they just come out white. So what foods have these carotenoids? Well, goldfinches turn yellow. So, and all they eat is Niger seed. So Niger seed has a lot of carotenoids, and insects in general have carotenoids. Invertebrates generally have carotenoids. It's a sign of, it's a higher quality, richer foods tend to have some of the carotenoids. So that was a long answer, but the birds need different kind of pigments, and they don't quite come out the right colors if they don't get enough from their diet, if they're orange, red, or yellow birds. Do I have any good birding tips or secrets? Yes, lots. Use the Merlin app, the free Merlin app on your phone. It will actually identify the bird songs for you about 95% correctly, and it will tell you what's around. And it's not cheating. It just means that you can then look around for that particular kind of bird, which is probably way up in the treetops, and you wouldn't see it. It's a miracle that this thing works as well as it does. So I recommend downloading the Merlin app for free from the on your phone from the App Store. Yes. Merlin, like the bird, Merlin, or the wizard from King Arthur. So that's my first tip. I just love watching my students use it. They just walk around like this all over campus and say the names of birds. They don't even stop to look at them. And sometimes they're not the right birds, but it's fun. And then the other thing that I would do is be aware that if you go around looking for birds, the more people you have, the less birds you're going to see. And the later you go out in the morning, the less birds you're going to see. So the ideal birding is done alone or with one other person before 9 o'clock in the morning. And if you just go out with a bunch of people at 2 in the afternoon, you're going to be disappointed because the birds are just way up in the trees, not doing much. So bird early in small groups or alone. Alone's not that fun, and you don't have anyone to help you identify the birds, but 2 or 3 people. I take classes out and I can see, you know, with each additional student, we see fewer and fewer birds. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My face hurts from smiling so hard. All the bird stuff. So I just want to, again, thank you. We're very lucky to have you here. Thank you to our guests here and our guests at home with all the great questions. Our next Naturally Speaking series will kind of piggyback on some of the things you mentioned. It's going to be about pollution, plastic, especially sources, impacts, and solutions. And that will feature Katie Register. She's the executive director of the Virginia Clean Waterways. And also timely, having Dan here is we are right in the middle of Earth Week. That will culminate with Earth Day on Saturday. We are right in the middle of our Virginia native species plant sale. So all of our plants at our plant sale are native to Virginia. They're raised without pesticides. So please join us for that. That will be this weekend, Saturday and Sunday from 9 to 4:30. And then again, April 29th through the 30th, also 9 to 4:30. And that is open to the public. So anyone that is watching online that's not a member can come. We had our member preview. It's always beneficial to be a member because you get notifications and early access. Earth Day this Saturday will include vermiculture, composting, public animal and science programs, tastings of bird-friendly coffee and chocolate, which we're pleased to have in our store. And we will feature some special guests. We have a book signing with a local author who wrote a story about mockingbirds and some other guests. We also have our Community Conservation Challenge going on right now, and that is our ask of you as our community to support the Virginia Living Museum. And that will culminate in our Otterball Conservation Gala, which is our big fundraising event that we have every year. And a big exciting thing is Destination Dinosaurs will be opening on May 27th. So if you like dinos or you know someone who does, you should come. Again, thank you so much. We are so pleased to have this series. We're very fortunate to have a community that supports adult education like this. Thank you so much. Have a good night.